So Dr. Tanu Luke is SVP and head of AI at US Bank, and she has a very broad remit to make US Bank an intelligent bank. And specifically, is going to be talking to us about the application of that in the quality and the testing area. With nothing further ado, really nothing further at this point, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Tanu Luke, SVP Head of AI at US Bank.
Well, Justin, thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right now. Well, thank you very much again for the kind introduction. As Justin just mentioned, I am SVP Head of AI at US Bank, and today I'm very excited to present this talk to you, which is going to not only highlight artificial intelligence, but some of the quality assurance needs within the industry. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen, and hopefully everybody is able to see this. All right. So as I mentioned, my talk is centered around the state of artificial intelligence today, especially in banking. And with that, I'm going to turn my video off for a quick second. So in the world of artificial intelligence, we sometimes wonder about not just the state of AI on the hype, but is it truly a hype, or is there something more substantial? So with that, I'm going to start with some really impressive numbers. What we see here are some impressive projections related to the use of AI at enterprise scale today, where we've seen projected growth of close to about a $1.6 billion from 2018 projected to about $31 billion by the end of 2025. So in less than the decade, in 5 years from now. And by all estimates, these are very conservative numbers. But what we've seen that in recent surveys and studies by several industry leaders and various industry evangelists have talked about or indicated these significant numbers are giving each of these industries at enterprise a competitive edge. But in addition, they'll also provide access to new and traditional markets and consumers. More important of all, most of us believe that across various industries, AI is going to not only play a significant role in reducing costs, but also in helping increase productivity across these various sectors. This is especially true in the case of banking and finance, where, again, some very staggeringly impressive numbers. What we see is the anticipated growth of AI in investment. The AI investment in general in the banking finance sector is close to about $57 billion today by the end of this year, actually, and very few months are left at the end of this year. But the estimates are, again, very conservative, which is now anticipated to be in the trillions of dollars of revenue by the end of this decade. But most experts believe not only that these numbers are conservative, but especially given the rise of the digital technology due to the pandemic, where there are some key focus areas that we've seen a surge in AI applications. The couple of them I'm highlighting are improving customer experience, for example, creating better products and services, improving operational excellence through automation is a huge focus. That is true for AI at US Bank as well, and creating proactive threat intelligence, so cybersecurity threats, for example, or fraud detection. Now, in this section, I'm going to highlight a small subset of these AI applications in banking and finance today as we see them. So one of the commonly well understood or commonly known applications of AI happens to be in the credit decisioning space. Now, use of data science models and credit decisioning, some would argue, is not new. So that's not the new latest and greatest. What is relatively new, however, is the use of alternative data sources. So things like social media profiles, types of computers somebody might use, the color of the car somebody might be driving, where you're shopping. All of these can now be considered, they are not only considered alternative data, but now can be combined through AI algorithms, very sophisticated AI algorithms that help us find hidden patterns and relationship between these correlated factors, but more importantly, between correlated factors and consumer behavior, so projections of consumer behavior. This is allowing for large amounts of data, of not just this type of data, but various categories of data to be factored into sophisticated credit calculations. Now, I have a quote here that I really like, which I will quote from the Brookings Institute article. So if there is data out there today about a consumer or about you, there is probably a way to integrate that into credit models, and which is mostly true, not just here, but we've seen various countries actually using that for various social media type of credit modeling as well. The biggest benefit here is that AI is helping open up the credit market that we would have considered traditionally to be of the underserved population, like millennials, younger populations, women in general, small businesses, but this is primarily possible through the use of big data and AI technologies. So that's one of the obvious applications that we see a surge in the AI space. The other one that we are seeing quite a bit of, again, not new by definite standards, but quite a bit of interest right now and obvious applications from AI is in the fraud detection space. Now, similarly, data science models and machine learning models and AI algorithms in the fraud space is not new in banking. It's been around for several decades now. What is again new is the evolution of this various types of fraud and the availability of various types of data, so majority of which are dynamic in nature, both the data as well as the fraud, so human type of fraud detection, for example, where fraudulent behaviors are updated sometimes, let's assume several times that we see during an actual standard transaction in order to avoid in order to avoid detection, for example. So in addition, what we see, I have a quote here, an example, where card present fraud accounted for only about 19% in 2018 of cases, of fraud cases, which was down from about 70% in 2015 in just about 3 years. However, if you now compare that to card not present fraud, what you will find is there's a significant increase of about 27% of the cases that were reported in 2015 to about 76% in 2018. That is quite a staggering number. But more importantly, if you look at the cost of that to the financial industry, is estimated to be about 130 billion of losses related to threats in the banking and finance industry in particular. So here, the use of some very simple data science models, machine learning models like logistic regression, to very sophisticated deep neural networks that are used very much today, can be used to learn patterns from each of these transactions, these daily transactions or these hourly transactions, therefore giving us the ability to not only prevent fraudulent transactions in real time, but also learn from them for the next use case. The next one that I'm going to highlight, the use of AI in banking, is around personalized banking, this concept of personalized banking. So what do we know? Over the last several years right now, the concept of personalized banking has taken a life of its own. We've seen an upwards trend where customers want tools that can help the customers essentially plan, make real-time spending adjustments, and monitor their budgets, for example, effectively. So that's something that has seen an upwards trend, of course. But today, in terms of more than just these ability to monitor and look at your transactions on a regular basis, what we've seen is that there is a new meaning that we are seeing around the personalized banking space because of the pandemic. Today, we see an increased demand for contactless and digital banking experiences. As everybody here is aware, right now, everything is contactless, and we're moving more and more towards digital experiences. But what we see is that these experiences range anywhere from chatbots for customer service to intelligent assistant, which use very sophisticated AI algorithms like natural language processing, natural language understanding for customer service operations. Like, for example, operations where you're responding to customer disputes, customer service, in addition, providing real-time customized financial advice, where you should invest, where you should go, and where you should be moving your money, amongst other applications. Now, by some estimates, the use of personalization through artificial intelligence in banking, specifically when it comes to customer-facing applications and customer service, in the dispute resolution space, for example, the numbers again are pretty impressive. They are close to $860+ million or upwards for associated cost savings just by the use of AI and chatbots and virtual assistant and dispute resolution. So we at US Bank have recently released our natural language processing and voice-driven virtual assistant, which by all measures right now, within the last several months, specifically from April to May of this year, we've handled about 25,000 calls. And these calls, 50% of them, of SMS call volume, was related to COVID-19 pandemic and associated questions and help requested. The last application of AI in banking that is pretty commonly assumed to be true today is the use of speech recognition technologies, where AI technologies, again, like natural language processing, natural language understanding, natural language generation, amongst others, that recognize to recognize and understand spoken language and convert that into text is very common. The next thing we see that in the last several years, we've not just seen a dedicated research and development effort around the speech recognition, voice recognition technologies, but we've seen the use of voice recognition technology in banking being very purposeful, and purpose being the purpose of identity verification, authentication, where the identity of a customer is matched to their voice for the purposes of authentication, sometimes even for opening up your mobile app, banking mobile app. So in your online banking space. Some of the common AI-driven voice and speech recognition technologies in banking range from voice-activated banking mobile apps that we just talked about. US Bank has our own virtual assistant that is voice-activated, voice-generated, and response via voice as one of the components. The other one is interactive voice response. So this is IVR technology. It's been around for several years now. Voice-based intelligent assistant, again, some do have that, not just voice-activated, voice-based intelligent assistant. So Bank of America, Erica, and others have it as well. Biometric multi-factor authentication for fraud prevention. This is another place where voice is being used as an authentication method for fraud prevention, essentially. So we at US Bank are leveraging very similarly for these types of technologies for similar purposes, including the voice-based virtual assistant I just talked about, IVR, the interactive voice response as the other capability. So now that we've sort of seen, this is obviously not a comprehensive list, but what I wanted to do is sort of set the stage for some of these technologies that we take for granted today. And we don't really think mostly about the AI that it's based off of, but more importantly, we generally do not really consider quality assurance to be a real factor. So with that, I will highlight, while there are numerous benefits of AI that we just looked at before with the staggering numbers associated with it, there are also several challenges in successful implementation of AI at scale in the banking sector and especially at enterprise scale. Some of these fall into these high-level categories. Again, not a comprehensive list. This is by no means a comprehensive list. However, what I'd like to do is break these down into two major categories. The first has to do with the tactical, more implementation challenges that are well understood. Most of us know about them or in the industry have either faced them themselves or are aware of them. But the second category consists of more subtle list, if you would, of challenges which are not necessarily immediately apparent or obvious or easily solvable for that matter. Some of the more well understood challenges revolve around your data quality, lack of the right level of data availability, and potential biases on the data as we know of them today. Now, also well known are challenges arising from lack of domain knowledge and skills gap and experience gaps essentially within an organization, especially banking, where it's often commonplace to assume that the data science models can be extended to full-scale implementation in production, which is often not true. Actually, most of the time it's not accurate. Here we also run into issues related to scalability, for example, or robustness of AI applications in production. Again, in the banking and finance sector, this is a key component that we keep track of. Moreover, in business, one of the biggest blind spots we tend to run into is with regards to this short-term view or short-term lens, the short-term benefits as opposed to the long-term cost consideration. For example, we often take accuracy for granted. So when we look at accuracy of models, we look at accuracy of these models in development as the best measure of success and map that back into your return on investment. But often we forget to actually take into account a holistic view where things like bias, your unintended consequences of model drift, or data proxies, for example, are sometimes an afterthought. And sometimes we don't even recognize that that is a concern until much later, until sometimes years in the making. So with that, let's take a closer look at some of the more subtle and not easily solvable problems in the AI space that we know of. And starting with, obviously, facial recognition technology in banking. The use of facial recognition technology in banking and finance, again, incredibly well known, very well understood today. Everybody takes that for granted almost today. But this range from, if you just look at the list of applications, it's just a very small list. But if you just look at their application list, it's quite impressive, which range from things like facial scans used for online security, physical security, to ID verification and authentication. More importantly, to activate sometimes your mobile apps, your mobile banking apps, and for fraud detection, and just to name a few. This is just a very high level list. But what we find is, as well known as this technology is, and as impressive as this technology's reach is in helping the banking sector, the use of the facial recognition technology, again, being widespread and purported to be effective for fraud prevention, which is an essential tool in banking and finance, we are also aware today of some of the very serious challenges of this technology. It's been in the news for several years now, and here's why. Dating all the way back to 2012, so almost more than close to a decade and a half back, several studies reported potential adverse impacts of this technology due to significant data and algorithm bias, where accuracy rates of facial recognition or detection of faces, accurate face detection of African Americans, for example, ethnic minorities, women's faces, young populations were significantly lower, and the misidentification rates were higher in these populations. Now, that in banking is obviously a certain concern. But in addition to the bias, there are obvious privacy and security concerns. So as intense as the slide is, I wanted to keep the verbiage in there because it highlights some of the key concerns in the privacy sector from the lens of privacy and security. Now, moreover, given the increase in data breaches recently, as we've seen an upsurge in the data breaches and data loss across the world, especially over the last couple of years, the implementation of various, and in addition, we've seen various national and international data and privacy laws being enacted. There is also increased awareness and increasing awareness and concern around the security and privacy of these highly sensitive forms of data. So if you folks are reading the slide, I'm sure most of the folks on the call are actually aware that a recent, and I'll quote something that I find really impressive and captures the sentiment really well, a recent American Banker article quotes, for example, if your credit card number gets leaked, you can certainly get one, a new one to replace it. But if you're using a facial scan and the information about your face gets leaked, this facial scan data gets leaked, you cannot get a new face. So you're stuck with the face you have. So you basically have to figure out the privacy. We have to work around the privacy and security concerns and take that very seriously in our banking sector, obviously. The next obvious technology issue that we run into is related to the speech recognition, voice recognition technology and the unintended consequences. So similarly, very recent studies at Stanford have been showing, and others similarly have come across, and have found bias and disparity in several commercially available automated speech recognition technologies, or ASRs as they're known, with lower accuracy rates of detection and impacts, significant disparate impact potential for that for African Americans, other minorities, women in general, and such. So similar to facial recognition, this also has some serious impacts. The next technology challenge that I'll talk about, the thing that we all take for granted, as I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, chatbots. Everybody has one today, especially in banking, that is used quite a bit. Rule-based chatbots, AI-driven chatbots are used. There is just, given the ubiquity of chatbots today, there are several instances and examples of potential for chatbot harm or harm from chatbots without the proper guardrails. I wanted to highlight two of them that are pretty well known by now, where without the proper guardrails and without a strong quality assurance, quality control check, for example, and continuous monitoring and alerting, here are the potential implications that the simple chatbot can all of a sudden not be as simple, and there are potential for harm. The next one that I want to highlight, the next two are related to the very subtle sort of challenges in the AI that I talked about at the very beginning of this section. So this has to do with the space of credit decisioning, for example, the fairness, transparency, and explainability factors. So what we find is, similarly in the credit decisioning space, several studies have found that there are strong indicators of harm from disparate impacts related to the use of AI models in loan underwriting. So when it comes to the minority populations, for example, some of these models have been found to overfit the data and thereby charging minority borrowers sometimes higher interest rates due to algorithmic and data bias. Now, again, credit models are not new. the impacts, the disparate impacts are now starting to be realized, and we are starting to be becoming more aware of them. So the common thread that we find is bias in AI, and not just in the data, but in the algorithm that I'll talk about in a second. But while AI has the potential to reduce bias if designed carefully and implemented with the appropriate checks and balances and guardrails, we are more aware today of ultimately AI algorithms and data science models are not just prone due to factors like overfitting, but also due to potential biases built into these programs and algorithms by the human programmers themselves, or the AI developers and engineers themselves, or the system itself. So in addition to highlighting the significance and not just of the need for security of these data sources and the privacy concerns surrounding it, these studies and these articles, basically these blogs, etc., have highlighted today some very subtly and some very obviously the need to ensure that AI applications go through a strict quality control, quality assurance check, a set of strong repeatable factors that we can then reproduce to ensure quality of our AI applications. So with that, let's move to how do we do that? Quality assurance and AI, what does that really look like? So what does quality assurance really look like? Let's start with the very fundamental life cycle that we all sort of know commonly, traditional AI life cycle. Here we see in this AI lifecycle, there are many components, but what I've done here is these are grouped together for the steps from concept all the way into production to 5 major categories of activities, so to speak, or groups. So the first category is starting with the ideation step. So here is in the business case where somebody is evaluating, or groups, data science teams, AI teams, or business in general is evaluating whether a particular use case is good for AI or not, or is a good AI use case. So here we start with that, can be used to evaluate not just the appropriateness of the use case, the return on investment, for example, ethical and strategic view, or ethical and strategic value of a particular use case, but also availability of the data. In addition to checking to ensure that the data that is available is reliable. Is reliable and readily available. Now, in establishing, more importantly, this is the same place where QA can establish guardrails and evaluation criteria and define metrics in addition to the key performance evaluators and parameters. So this is the first of the 5-step process in the AI space where QA really plays an important part. The next one is your data processing, data feature selection process. So this is a standard next category of the data prep and feature evaluation step in the AI lifecycle. The QA process would consist of assessment of the data quality to ensure that the data is free of bias and is complete, in addition to ensuring that the data is actually suitable and appropriate for the use case that we're looking at this point. So that's a key measure for the longevity of an AI application, as we see in banking also. The next step is in the model development and model testing, model build, essentially. So in the category of AI ML development, QA procedures would include the evaluation of models to assess suitability. So here the QA process would ensure that the model is not only prone to overfitting, but to check against it, and the results and outputs are free of bias. That the model performs reliably sometimes, and ensure that it is actually reliable across the lifecycle. And then the data and model inputs and outputs are explainable. This is a really crucial element, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then the entire process is actually transparent, especially in the banking industry. So the explainability and transparency are some of the key factors that we use right now. And I'll talk about how US Bank is doing it in a second. Model validation and development. Again, quality assurance, quality control plays a crucial role in this step as well, in the model validation step, both in the pre and the post deployment of AI. So here we can think of QA, QC processes, the quality assurance, quality control processes would help ensure the models are scalable and robust under conditions that we will see normally in production. Conditions like whether data is available, whether there are latency issues, things of that nature. And to ensure that there are minimal to no impacts on the quality and performance of these models in production due to these latency error issues. Most of all, the quality assurance process should ensure in this case the model results are still explainable in simple terms and transparent, that we know how features are combined together in order to create an output, for example, and to ensure that the original purported project purpose is true in deployment as well. So it doesn't deviate from that expected norm. Next step is the second or the last step, which has two parts to it. Finally, in this part, we see the QA process consists of two steps: post-model deployment. The step one ensures accuracy and timeliness of the models itself, to retrain the models and the tracking, to ensure that the performance and the criteria that we were evaluating are still true. So the outputs are bias-free, there is limited to no drift, maintain the accuracy within an acceptable range, and production is still true. The next thing that we noticed in the QA, the importance of the QA process here in the model monitoring and calibration phase, is to ensure the quality of the results are continuously monitored, and the in production goes to are still appropriate, that they are validated to be accurate. So from the original intent, that is. Now these QA processes help ensure that the return on investment is still on track, first and foremost, and the application still meets ethical suitable, essentially in the banking sector, for continued use, both in banking and finance, but also in the customer experience space. Is there any issue with how the model was initially developed to, let's say, the experience that a customer is saying? So that's a really important factor that we have to evaluate and continuously monitor through QA/QC. So with that, this is the comprehensive list of the entire life cycle and the importance of QA, quality assurance, quality control checks, and how we do that in the model development in the AI life cycle. Now, as part of the Effective AI program, we at US Bank have also created a set of very strong ethical principles. And then we have also created explainability and transparency guidelines, which guide not only our compliance and risk process, but also the development of the AI applications. And we are right now working towards applications that I just talked about. So this is a comprehensive list, and then we, US Bank, are also moving towards that and implementing it. Today, the use of, obviously, the benefits of AI are really well known. As we see, there are more and more awareness around the use and benefits of AI in banking and finance industry. But at the same time, there are several challenges just highlighted. And today, there are numerous regulatory agencies, research institutions, and the like that are providing guidance, white papers, articles, blogs, you name it, to guide a fair, ethical, and efficient development of the AI process itself, especially as it applies to banking and finance. Now here one sees such example, one very particular example that I picked out is from the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, which requires AI tools to be transparent, fair, and empirically sound, with decisions communicated to the consumers in an appropriate manner. I thought that was very noteworthy, in that this is now the guidance across various other regulatory industries, agencies as well. And in closing, the last thing I wanted to talk about was, in final, AI process is a holistic process, where the quality assurance, quality check process plays not just an important part in the implementation state, but it is crucial. It plays an important role in the ethics, regulation, and governance. In addition to those things, quality assurance and quality control is really important. As we see here, without quality assurance, quality control, it would be close to impossible to ensure that our AI applications, especially in banking or in the finance sector, are fair, bias-free, explainable, transparent, and robust, and more importantly, secure. So with that, I am going to say thank you to all for your very kind attention and listening to this talk. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Justin for any questions at the end.
That was terrific. I'm really sorry to say that we are, in fact, out of time. It's been a really interesting talk.